Hello and welcome everyone to the Art Workshop. I'm Christopher Epling. We thank you for tuning in today on Pike TV, and hopefully we'll bring you some interesting and informative and educational material on the basics of cartooning. That's what we're all about with this program. We're sharing basic concepts, drawing methods, styles, techniques that if you're at home and you're interested in drawing, let's say it's something that you've just picked up and doodle from time to time and you'd like to learn more about some techniques, then this is the show for you. Today we're actually going to be looking at a couple of different things. I thought we could look at mapping a character out for cartooning, and what does mapping a character even mean? We'll be talking about that today. We're also going to be taking all the elements that we're talking about and at the end putting those together into a final drawing using the different things we're going to be looking at. It's really important as a cartoonist or anyone interested in art in general to understand the basic shapes and the basic things that go into a drawing. A lot of time young artists will get confused and become even all around disinterested in drawing in general whenever they approach a drawing that looks a little complex, or they try something and they draw it and it doesn't look exactly like what it is they're looking at or hope to draw. That can be really discouraging. I know in my own experience early on and even today sometimes I'll look at something that I want to draw and I'll have an idea how it should look, and it's almost like trying to connect your hand to your brain and getting that concept out on paper exactly the way you think it should look. It can be a real tricky process. So my goal is to share the things that I've learned that's made that process a little bit more bearable and a little more enjoyable with you, the viewer. Okay? And the first really basic area to start with is mapping out a character. What does that mean? And I brought a book today to share with you. I think this will be helpful. And we're going to be looking at characters that we all have heard about in some way. It doesn't really matter how old you are or how young you are. Star Wars is a franchise. It started out with a basic storyline idea, and this has really grown now into a phenomenon. Star Wars encompasses a large range of different characters, different looks, shapes, and backgrounds and attitudes, and from heroes to what we call protagonists or villains, okay? There's a large range of different characters in Star Wars. But no matter what it is that you look at or want to look at when it comes to mapping a character, it all starts out with the basic shapes. Now, with this book that I've brought today, you can see the circle method that we've talked about many times on the show is really brought into light here. So we map out a character. That basically means that we're building the character's general shapes. Everyone's heard of stick figures. Everyone can draw a stick figure. If you can make a circle and a line and you can put those together and arrange those in a certain way, you can make it look like a person. If you can create a stick figure, then you have the basic idea of mapping out a character. Now, with this particular sheet here, this is vellum, so it's see-through. Maybe a little hard to pick up, but it'll be clearer as we move forward. You can see the circles that are actually on this page here. It might help if I put the white behind it. Those circles that you see represent the general idea of the shape of this character. Okay? So when we look at this character, such as this, all right, we close our eyes for a second and we open them again, we can see how these circles, lines, shapes, ovals, all come together to create the character. That's mapping a character. And with cartooning, this is really important, because if you don't really understand how a character is put together, or if you're having trouble with seeing how the different shapes work beside each other or connected to one another, it's going to be really difficult for you to come up with your own ideas for a character or to even look at a character and draw it. For this particular one, we have, I'm assuming this is a Wookiee. That's a type of alien in the Star Wars franchise. The Wookiee is drawn comprised of different shapes. We can see that the body is more thick in the middle with long arms, and the arms are thick and the legs are thick. The head is more of an oval resting on this huge mass of a body. And if we look over to the examples of how this character is drawn out for us using the circle method, we can see this exact premise transferred over into these basic shapes. Okay, and we can look a little further. This is a how to draw Star Wars characters reference book. This is a really great example broken down into the circle method. So you start out with this stick figure. You start adding these shapes in as you move forward. Basic details, and then you end it with the detailed details, as they call them. And what this book was designed to do is that you look at these different steps, and then over on this section you draw those steps, okay? And there's books like this available for all sorts of different types of drawing examples. There's even ships, so mechanical objects, things that are engineered, that are built. They work along the same premise as human anatomy. These basic shapes all come together to form whatever it is that we want to create. So in this reference here, we have a spacecraft. Now the spacecraft, believe it or not, starts out as a stick figure. When we say stick figure in mapping characters, we're not only talking about figures made up of a human anatomy. We can also talk about things, like I said, with mechanical or engineered items or characters really in a story. A spacecraft can become a character in a story, such as those of you know the Millennium Falcon in Star Wars. That's a character of its own, really. But back to the techniques. We start out, as you can see, with these lines. Now, these general shape of this design, which is 2 cross-reference points, and what this does is it gives us an idea of where the angles are relate to one another. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate things today and get into perspective along with mapping characters, but it does come into play when doing or working with anatomy. So if you're interested in finding books like this, go to your local library. In Pike County, there's amazing resources available for young artists. Go to your library and ask the librarian or the person on staff to help you find books related to basic drawing. Now, a lot of young artists have trouble when it comes to shapes and things of a cartoon or a character, and there's different ways you can go about it. I'm going to draw some different shapes here of what we could use for a cartoon's head, okay? Around, now this represents, of course, like a stick figure. These are the shoulders here that I'm drawing. Now there's tons of different ways we could go about doing this. Adding different shapes together will give us different looks to a character. I'm going to draw a few of these together. So this is starting out with a circle type shape, then we have a cone type shape. Now we could flip that cone, and when we flip it, making it more wide at the bottom than it is at the top, almost looks like a lamp here at this point, but I'll come back in a second and show you how this comes together. So we could take these shapes and we put those together in ways that will give us different looks to a character, okay? Notice that on this particular one, there's a longer neck. Different circles and, different sizes of circles and different sizes of ovals. If you play with arranging these in different ways, you're going to see that it starts to take on the look, actually, of maybe even a personality of a certain character. All these things combined will help you in creating your own characters, perhaps, or if you're looking at a character that resembles some of these shapes. Knowing how the shapes relate to one another, though, is something totally different. And that's what we mean then when we talk about mapping a character. Mapping a character just basically breaks it down into, this is the general shape of this character. So now we have all these different looks to a character, starting out first with, with the simple circle, right, that we can do. The circle, when we go back then, we start adding what we call features to it. The features really make it pop out. And we can see then that, this circle that we started out with becomes a character. Now you might say, well, now how in the world do you take this shape that you're playing around with here and turn it into something that looks, like a human? Well, we'll go ahead and get into that just here in a second. Let me finish this little guy up here. There we go. All right, so we have these shapes that we've put together. We have ovals and lines and different things. So when we go into it now and start adding detail, what we can do is we can visualize where we'd like for the features to be. Now we're talking from a human's perspective here. So with this general shape of what this cartoon character's head would be, we could imagine it to have maybe a small nose. Okay, the eyes could be up towards the top of the head. You could play around with where you want to place these things. Now you notice the chin is very big at the bottom. This design is more wide at the bottom as it is at the top. So you can play with that with the features. So the chin is very large, such as this. And adding on the features then to this character will bring out a certain personality of a character. Now, of course, with cartooning, you know, it's an exaggeration of what the actual character would look like, right? I mean, if you look at cartoons, you notice that if a human being was to really look like this guy here with this massive chin, it'd be a little interesting. But you know, we want to play around with features because cartooning exaggerates features. That's what it does. Sometimes I've even seen it where, and I'm sure you have too, a certain character will try to resemble what we call I think it's an anamorphic look to it. So that means that the character actually resembles maybe a certain animal even. Like for instance, if we draw a person to look like this little mole-like type of character here, or if we were to do one where the character resembles maybe a bulldog, right? With he's got maybe his tooth here, and there we go, the flat head at the top, and his ears at the sides just pointing up. This kind of more resembles maybe a gremlin, if you want. But using these different shapes together in these different ways will give you different looks to a character, which adds to the personality of the character. So this could possibly be a villain if we make his eyebrows look a little menacing. This guy here could maybe be a fun character who's, let's say, a hero type character even, right? So playing around with how you add the features to your mapping really brings out the character's personalities, okay? Now, another big question, now again, at the end, we're going to combine all these things together that we're learning to create a final cartoon. Another thing that I've noticed students having some trouble with is the design of, or I'm sorry, the drawing of things like mouths and also eyes. So for that, I want to keep it really simple. Now, we're looking at a profile here, and I'll draw it out for you first. So this is going to be a nose, and you know, you can follow along with me if you want at home on all of these things. I would like for you to. It'd be great if you would. You could go to theholler.org and look for the art workshop, and you could actually share this with us here. But for this little bit, I'd like for you to watch and just see how this comes together. So if these were lips here, and then these are detailed, so you can see the folds and the nose, and you can see how all these things come together to make the lips. So going back over it in a little bit more detail now, you can really get detailed with your cartooning. But cartooning is more about an exaggerated look to whatever it is you're considering, and we want to keep that in mind as we move forward. So students having trouble with things like drawing noses or eyes, the biggest advice that I can give is to keep it simple. So if we were to draw this, then again, keeping it simple, notice that the nose is just represented by this L. This looks like the letter L. And then drawing straight down without worrying about these folds of the lips and where the lips bend and all this other stuff. We're not going to focus on that right now. We're actually going to look more at just adding a line in here that's going to represent the mouth, okay? So this is the difference between drawing from a realistic perspective and then drawing from a cartooning perspective. Cartooning is simple, so don't get overwhelmed by it. But even while drawing in a simple method, it can be sometimes a little challenging for students. There's a style of art that is called manga or manga, however you want to pronounce it. It's up to you. Now, we talked a little bit about manga in one of our episodes and how it's different than anime. Manga is actually, all that means is the printed form. So if of the cartoon in Japan. So if you see a cartoon that's printed in a comic book, so on paper, that's a manga. If you see it and it's in animated form, so on film, that's an anime. That's the difference. The style of art, there is no real difference in anime or manga. It's the same thing. So this is from a realistic perspective of the human eye. So if we're drawing this same eye or an eye similar to this in a manga type format, you may see something where the ear is off to the side. There's not too much detail given. The head usually slopes sharply to a point, and then the eye is usually over-exaggerated. The pupils are very large, so if this was an excited, the character was excited at this point, you may see something along these lines for the eye. So an exaggeration of what something looks like in reality is cartooning, but there's tons of different styles for that. But we go back to the original drawing here, and I emphasize the fact that you want to keep it simple. You can do a whole lot just by how you arrange the shapes, making up what we call the composition of whatever it is you're trying to draw. Now you may say at home, this is way too technical. I just want to draw Snoopy. I want to draw Charlie Brown. When we're talking about composition, we're talking about perspective, but these things matter. So when you leave, let's say you stop watching the show today and you turn it off and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to draw something. I've got all the information I need. Then what you want to think about when you start creating that, these elements will pop up again. You have to address composition. Your character has a look to it. Even if it's a circle with 2 dots for an eye, that's your composition. And they're important. You'll find yourself doing this no matter what I'm trying to say, okay? All right, now for mouths. I'm sorry, not for mouths, but for the shapes of the body. The shapes of bodies are just as diverse as the shapes of a head when you're considering designing a character or drawing a character, and we'll go over a few of these right now, okay? So if I have a character who, let's say, is a superhero, and I'm using the Marvel method, I'm going to start out and we'll have this shape at the top to represent the head, okay? Now remember, basic mapping of a character, we're drawing stick figures. But instead of just drawing a few different lines with a circle on top of them, we're just going to expand those a little bit and make shapes instead of lines, okay? So the circle for the head, and then we have maybe a smaller circle for the torso. The legs we're here for this particular character, we'll make them smaller, so 2 ovals for the thigh area, and then 2 more ovals for the calf area, and then a couple of ovals for the feet. Okay, and then the arms. So we're drawing a superhero type character. They're very muscular, so we may draw a circle here for the joints. Anytime you're drawing points of articulation, you like to draw circles. Remember that. So we have 2 circles here, and then we join those together by, we join the circles with the hands by drawing these ovals. So one here, here, and then our point of articulation for the elbow, those 2 circles, and then we have another oval and then another circle for the arm. So you can see how this is a stick figure, but you can see how it looks very muscular, right? So if we were to do the same thing now, but for a very thin character, let's say this character is a villain. So let's use one of our styles of heads from earlier. We'll use the cone look to it. So we've drawn a circle with the cone shape below it. And then for the body on this now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it very thin. So where I have the very thick design here for our superhero, I'm using a very thin oval here, okay? And then the legs will be very thin again, down to the feet, using ovals and circles for points of articulation. Smaller circles now for the arms, very small ovals making up the arms, and then also for the other arm. So for our villain, we may make our villain very thin. Now this is composition, right? All these things put together in a certain way to give a certain look is our composition. When you're designing a character, or if you're drawing a character by looking at another character someone else has drawn, try to look at these basic shapes that you're seeing. How are those shapes connected together, and notice how they put those together to get a certain emotion or a certain character's personality to show through the design of the character. Okay, so taking the things that we've already talked about now and putting those together to draw a character begins with, of course, a blank sheet of paper and an idea of what we're wanting. And what we're wanting for this particular character is a simple design for the head, and then we'll worry about the body afterwards. So let's think about the head first. And just to keep it simple, let's try with a circle to begin with. So draw along with me at home. Think about what we've talked about so far. So that circle is going to turn into our character's head, okay? Now let's go ahead at the bottom here and keep it pretty simple as well by adding just an oval here. That's it. So we have a circle and an oval, right? So we have that so far. For the neck, we're going to put a small oval at the bottom here, okay? And then we'll worry about drawing in the shoulders in a minute. Now, I have the basic shapes that make up a cartoon character's head. The next step in this is adding features. In order to add features though, it requires planning, a little bit of planning. Now, I want my character to be looking at the viewer from head on. So from, you know, from a, the word escapes me at the moment, but we're looking straight forward at this character, okay? I like to add lines that represent what we call center mass of the character's face. So the line going straight down, separating the two halves of a face, this is what this is. So this line will be what divides the eyes, and then the nose will fall on this line, and the mouth will fall on this line as well. I like to add another line on here to show me exactly where I'll be placing the eyes. So this is center mass right here, okay? This point in the middle. Now that I have that, I'll go ahead and think about the placement of ears. With anatomy, and cartooning follows some anatomy, such as the ears may be really exaggerated, but they're usually located on the sides of a head, just with, you know, normal human anatomy. Typically the human ear doesn't extend above the brow on any human. So the tip of a human ear will follow this line of where the eyes are. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add these little shapes on the side to represent the ears now. Okay? Since I have the center mass and I have the ears and where the eyes will go, I'll place another line to show where the nose will be, and then another line to show where the mouth will be. So I have everything I need now to draw this human cartoon character. Going back up to the hairline, there's tons of ways you can draw hair. It's up to you, but for the purpose of this drawing, I'm just going to place the hair on top of this character just so that we have a basic idea of where the placement is for these things, okay? Now notice I'm not drawing exactly on top of my circle. I'm going above it a little bit. You see that? It's not following that line. The only thing that the circle does is it helps provide a map for where you want to draw. Now I have the hair drawn at the top, so I can add in the eyebrows, okay? Placing them in different ways gives different emotion to a character. For instance, this could be happy, normal, just a peaceful look, or we could make the character angry by bending them, okay? So we'll do that. So the character is upset, so there's our eyebrows, right? Now the next thing we're going to do is work on our eyes. So you could start out, just draw a couple circles for the eyes, okay? Now this is detailed mapping of your character, so we may not keep that exact look of those circles, but we know basically where the eyes will be. Now remember earlier I said keep it simple, so for the nose, just add what looks almost like a greater than sign or a less than sign. In math, though, you put this just so at the bottom here so that it represents where the nose will be. And then also for the mouth, keeping it simple, just a straight line bent a little bit. And he's smiling, but he's mad, so we can get an idea of what's going on in this character's head, right? A little bit. We can assume, we can imagine, and that's what it's all about, really. That's what art does. Two people could look at the same thing and get different interpretations of it, and that's the great thing about art. All right, so we're putting a little detail into the ear now, just a couple little lines here to represent the folds, and then I may put more detail now into the hair, just building on it a little bit more. Okay, just giving it a little bit more feature than just what I've seen so far, what I've placed on here so far. All right, there we go. Now let's work on the neck. This oval that we created will help guide us. So we've drawn these two lines. One thing I've seen students do a whole lot is they will actually just draw like lines across to represent a shirt. Well, that's fine, that works if that's what you want. But if you come outside the line down here a little bit and you just add a couple more lines onto it, it gives the effect that the shirt's actually being worn instead of just drawing straight through like a spandex outfit or something. This actually looks like this character has on a shirt, okay? Now I want to go back up to the eyes for a second. I drew these circles that are supposed to help to guide me, and they are guiding me. So what I want to do here is actually, I want to figure out how the shape of the eyes should look. So I'm going to come up to the top, and instead of making them just circles, I may oval them out a little bit more and actually give the effect maybe of an egg shape even. So where it comes out to a point, so it looks like an egg on its side. You don't have to do this. This is just preference of what you'd like to draw on your character, how you'd like your character to look, okay? Now for the pupils, put those here, draw those in. Now once I have the mapping done for my character, how my character looks in general, what I might do now, and what's good to do, is to go back over it a little bit and you add just a little more detail in there, okay? So our character here is almost finished, minus the last step in getting rid of all these pencil lines, right? And if you have a marker at home, what you can do is actually trace over your lines that you want to keep, okay? And this is the fun part of putting together a character, because this is the finishing of the character. So we start out with mapping, deciding what we want the character to look like, and then we move on from there into doing the finishing touches of our character, okay? This is the fun part because you get to see how it all comes together. Now the real big payoff at the end here is when we erase all these pencil lines. So everything goes away except for the lines that we choose to ink over, which we're doing right now. And I hope you followed along with me at home to create this character. I hope it's helped some to understand what we talk about when we say the circle method, what we talk about when we say mapping a character, also what it's like to think about a character's look in terms of the personality, okay? Now a lot of the things we've talked about today is really in reference of you creating your own character from home, right? So you draw some shapes to create a head, and you're deciding what those shapes will be based on what your character's personality is, and then go from there. But if you're looking at a character that you maybe like or enjoy, a popular cartoon character, and you want to draw that, then this method works just the same. But a lot of the work is done for you because the artist has already thought of all these things that we had to think about here to design this little guy, okay? Now, you could go back then, of course, erase these pencil lines out and make sure that your ink dries all the way. I've done this many times where I can't wait to see what it will look like finished, and I'll go to erasing, and lo and behold, I erase over ink that's wet, and a giant line appears straight down my paper. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed today's workshop. I hope you've had an experience where you've learned some things, and that you've want to take these things that you've learned and start creating on your own. Anyone can draw. It's these basic little concepts that you just have to get a hold of and understand. And once you do, you can pull those things together and you can create exactly what it is you need, okay? So thanks to Pike TV for making this show possible, and thanks to you, especially the viewer, for tuning in. Remember, share your work on theholler.org under the Art Workshop. Until next time, I'm Christopher Epling, and keep drawing.